Klaus, are you?
Oh, he's what? Actually, no, he's on Meet Echo. We have a couple of other people in Jabber, but it looks like some of well, Klaus is in both. We have Matt is in the room. Yeah, we have Jeff. Yes, Jeff PC. But I don't. Jeff, are you on audio as well? We'll see if he responds. Occasionally, we're on this slide info would be nice, but not required. Okay, so Jeff is hearing the audio. So if the speakers just say what slide we're on, that should take care of that. And I guess I'm looking at that, and I see there are slide numbers at the bottom, so that's good. All right, and so I babbled long enough that it's actually 1:30, and it's time to start the CBOR meeting. Hi, I'm Barry. I'm your new co-chair, and this is your old co-chair, Francesca, and I shouldn't say old, but you know, you can see whose hair is gray and whose is not. Let's see, what else?
Yeah. Welcome, Barry. Thank you for stepping up.
You're welcome. And I'll have to say my famous phrase here now that we have this: note the note well.
Okay, great. So you've seen it a couple of times, but if you haven't, please take a moment to read it. As a reminder, minutes are taken. Thank you. This meeting is recorded and your present is logged. There are the blue sheets over there. You can start putting in your name. This is the agenda for today. First of all, introduction on the status by us, and then Karsten will take on to talk about what is left in CDDL and in CBOR, and then we have a little bit of flex time. We'll see, the times are indicative, and then a wrap-up. Is there anything you would like to add in the agenda or change? Don't hear anything? Okay. So a very short status update. So there was a new version updated to for CDDL. So we are version 3. And during this meeting, we should go over what is left of the review comments that were done for the working group last call before last meeting, and what are the open issues left in the GitHub. And then for the 7049 BIS draft, it was last updated before IETF 101, so it wasn't updated for this meeting. And we'll see what's the status, and also what's the status of the discussions in the main list and in the GitHub about it. So I think you can take it, Karsten, while I change the presentation.
Karsten just threw the microphone on the floor.
For the record.
This is supposed to move.
The reason, of course, was that the microphone was not positioned for someone of his height.
No, okay. Can we have auto positioning systems for this, please?
Sure.
Hi, Stephanie. Can we have auto positioning systems for the mics, please?
On your left is the easiest way to change the right. Just a little lower on the behind the
knob. There.
That's the easiest way.
Loosen that and pull on the rod.
Or less stuff.
1, 2, 3.
Can we just standardize the height?
And we have a nice comment that we should standardize the height of the microphone.
Yeah, we should have stepping stones and holes in the floor for Charlie Perkins. And, yeah. Okay.
Standardize the height of people. All right. Let's get serious here because we don't have that much extra time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I typically start with a slide that just reminds people of what the CBOR working group was about, because we have a pretty specific mandate here, and one is taking RFC 7049, which is turning 5 at the end of the year, and take it to the next level in the IETF standardization process. So we are not here to invent major new stuff about CBOR, but we're here to make sure that we have a spec that is even better than what we have right now for essentially the same thing. And on the other hand, we also have language for specifying CBOR data items and also JSON data items. And that we actually want to move to standards track quickly. And the milestone date for that was May. So we are already late, and we don't want to be infinitely late. And a third thing that we are supposed to do, but only in a limited way, so far, we might recharter at some point, is look at CBOR tags. Tags are one of the two extension mechanisms, extensibility mechanisms of CBOR. There is another one, the simple data items, that's really hasn't even been exercised yet in the last 5 years. So that's not where the focus is. Most people want to define tags. And that's something that we also are looking at. So yeah, let's do this in 3 steps. So the tags part I have fits into the flex time part on the agenda. So let's first talk about CDDL. And I need to issue an apology for Henk, who is at the Trusted Execution Environments meeting. So it's really hard to get him because he's usually involved in another working group at the same time. So I'm the messenger here today again. So at IETF102, we had a nice idea of what would be done until May, and then we would be finished. What actually happened is that directly after the IETF, I got sick, and that delayed the process quite a while. So it hasn't all happened. The -03 that essentially takes the London results is 2 weeks old. And let me quickly go through what we did there and then through what we missed doing, unfortunately, because, of course, this was one of 10 internet drafts that had to get ready for this meeting. So there have been a number of really useful editorial comments, and I hope I see a few more editorial comments in the next couple of weeks. And so we clarified the definition of group entries, clarified how bare words behave. We fixed the inheritance example to actually be legal and had a few typos. So that's really useful. In London, we noticed that the usage of CBOR out there had drawn a thicker line between integers and floating point values than we thought we would 5 years ago. So in a few places, we made this explicit now. So for instance, a 1 doesn't match a 1.0 and a 1.0 doesn't match a 1. So we now have explicit text that tells you whether a constant you see in the CDDL spec is an integer or a floating point value. And I managed to cite my favorite ISO standard from 1985, so I'm happy. There is more text about security considerations. It's always a bit weird to talk about security considerations of a specification language. But yes, when you do a specification language, you think about how people will make mistakes that then turn into security issues. So it's really useful. And finally, I just went ahead and added strawman for a control operator registry, for an Ariana registry for control operators, without trying to also define a policy. And that's one of my next slides, whether we actually want to do this and if yes, how. There is an editor's copy on the GitHub site, github.com/CBOR-WG. I should have put that on the slide. And there are a few more things in there. We didn't define what a byte is. there are still people out there that think we have to use 20th century word octet because byte is not defined. So we just defined what a byte is. And we fully defined what the target types are that the size control operator actually can control. So it's for byte strings, I think for text strings, I don't remember it right now, but it's written up, and for unsigned integers. So that's all that is defined for, and if you think it should be defined for something else, then we should act quickly. Unfortunately, there was one review that was so good that we singled it out and didn't put it into issues, and you always get bitten when you do something like that, and that was Jim's review. So there are like 10 things in Jim's review that we still have to act on. And, pardon me? We all have been there, not turning something into issues, always bites you at some point. Okay, so there are still a few issues open on GitHub, and some of them just aren't going to be done in the current version of CTDL. So there was a request for co-occurrence constraints. It actually turns out that many co-occurrence constraints fit naturally with the grammar foundation of CTDL. So if you want to say one map key always occurs together with another map key, or they both don't occur, that's easy to say. But more complicated ones, like there need to be two timestamps in there, the starts from and the ends by timestamp, and the second timestamp has to be larger than the first timestamp. We cannot say that in CTDL because it's a grammar. It's not an executable language where you would be able to put in predicates like that. So that's something I want to get back to later when we're done with the current spec, but that we cannot do today, I think. There also was an editorial comment that we should be more explicit about the history of the document and its contributors, and I think that's a very good comment, but I wanted to do this right, so I didn't do it before the internet draft deadline, because I would have gotten it wrong. Okay, now the open issues that we do care about. There is one issue about specifying group matching. I think the current spec does this in Appendix C. But maybe that has to be improved. And that's one of the issues that is tagged as help wanted, because somebody has to read this who doesn't already know how it works. Because for me, it's perfectly obvious how it works, but I happen to know how it works. So we don't want to write standards documents as trapdoor functions that you only can understand if you already know what's in there. So if you have editorial improvements from that would be useful. And there is actually an old thread that we can process maybe with some editorial improvements.
Okay, we have a question from Jeffrey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yes, I think this could be handled editorially if everyone agrees that parse expression grammars are kind of the basis, but I think it's kind of more important than just kind of brush it off for next version, because there's no definition of what parse expression grammars mean in the spec, and there's no reference to them either. So if someone doesn't know what they are, there's no standard definition.
Right. So do you have an idea where we could get a useful reference here? I mean, there is a Wikipedia article about parse expression grammars, but maybe that's not the best one. So who in this room knows what a parse expression grammar is? I think Henk knows what a parse expression grammar is, but he cannot hear me. Okay, so yeah, maybe we can take that as one item for the notes, that we find a good reference for that. There needs to be a textbook somewhere, and if we need to cite the Dragon book, that we will cite the Dragon book. That certainly can be done.
And I think the mapping from CDDL syntax to parse expression grammar syntax, or whatever the input to that reference is, needs to be defined. Okay.
I think that will be a very short definition, because it essentially is parse expression grammar syntax, but we can check that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping that Jeffrey was going to be here, and being remote is almost as good. Thank you. So the next item is the extensibility item. CDDL essentially has one extension point. So of course we can always go ahead and do a CDDL 2.0 or something, so the languages are extensible by definition, but CDDL also has one extension point that is deliberately designed so other people can come in and do their thing, extend CDDL without kind of damaging the rest of the language. And that's the control operator. The control operator takes one type, the target type, and the control type, and generates a type according to the way the control operator is defined. And we had a recent discussion on the mailing list, and I think one observation was whenever you have these registered things, it's really hard to collect things together and know what is the current state. So I have the specification here, and is this a CDDL specification? Yes. And it needs this extension and that extension and a third one. So that of course is an operational problem in working with extensions. On the other hand, the observation is we probably are not going to do all useful control operators of this kind here, because there are other SDOs that have very specific things like their own legacy binary syntax, and they want to transport this in CBOR data structures. So they might be defining control operators that work just with their binary syntax. And we don't really want to pull all that development into a CBOR working group until the end of time. So it's probably appropriate to provide this extension point. So there is a little bit of a trade-off we have here. Make it too rigid, make it too free for all. Both are things we want to avoid. And I think the registration policy plays an important role in specifying a regime that actually works for all of us. And traditionally, people who wrote standards have written registration policies that were on the light side with respect to the guidance that the designated expert who executed on this got. So I recently wrote a completely unrelated draft, also with an INF policy that essentially says the designated expert can do what they want as long as they stay within this box. And that may be one way of handling this, giving some box and giving the designated expert a lot of freedom. And then, of course, Alexei has to find one. So,
in general, my understanding that designated expert or specification required is exactly the type when you cannot algorithmically prescribe how you will reject or accept registration. So I think defining the box and defining limitations and what expert is allowed and not allowed explicitly to do, I think it's the right way to go about it.
So one of the questions, Jim Schrod, so one of the questions about specification required that always comes up is public specification required or specification required?
I'm sorry. I didn't-
Do I have to
Public
be,
or not?
does that specification have to be publicly available?
That's what specification required.
No, it
requires.
doesn't.
Yes, it does. Has to be I wrote the BCP. It says it has to be a publicly available,
Okay.
long-term specification. If you want something that doesn't have to be that, you do expert review.
Sean Leonard. So I guess I don't see the need to define a registry for control operators now. I think there's a lot of issues here that will just delay the release of this specification. And I'm not sure actually how much people are using or will use control operators when defining specifications and not regret putting the control operator there in the first place, because in a revision of their protocol, they may want to change what the restrictions are.
Yeah, one problem with specification required is also that many people do not read RFC 681 whatever and don't know what it actually means and think if I draw up a piece of paper and hand that to the designated expert, then I'm done. And that's not what is meant. So the expert actually has the prerogative to do some quality control on that specification. So if the specification is not good enough for interoperability, it's not a specification. At least that's how I read 81. What's the number? 26?
I don't remember. It's BCP 26.
Thank you.
So what I think we need to do here is, if there are two things: decide if we're going to have a registry, what the policy is, and I think specification required sounds like that's already, we're okay on that. The question is, do we need to put create a registry now?
And the alternative would be?
To defer it until we need it.
But we don't need it. The users need it.
Okay, then if it could be the point is, it could be a separate document.
Paul Hoffman, terrible idea, sir. It's easy to put in this document. The person who's first going to need it is going to be reading this document. And yes, it's close to the end, but it's near the security consideration section, so they'll see it. I'm generally a fan of expert review as compared to specification required for these things. However, I will also give the caveat that we are going to choose the wrong way to do this. Every working group gets it wrong. I can't think of a single instance where someone said, "Oh, we're going to do the registry this way or this way," and everyone was happy. So, and I think we're within the realm. So I'm not saying, "Oh, let's argue about this longer." We're going to get it wrong, but I think let's get it at least. Meaning, let's set up the registry in this document.
So wait, don't go away, Paul.
I'm sorry.
Don't go away. So you're saying you think we do not need a specification for each of the things that are registered?
If we have an IANA registry with an expert reviewer and the expert reviewer is not insane, then if someone comes to them with a piece of paper where it's written on, the expert reviewer says, "Oh God, everyone's going to understand this. We don't need the piece of paper." That's fine. Most expert reviewers would say, "Where's your draft? Where's your document?" And it becomes the moral equivalent of specification required, but not exactly under the exact terms or whatever. It's more trusting a human than trusting the process.
For some registries, IANA already publishes registration templates, and they are expert review, but the templates it published. So it's almost,
It's a small specification.
yes, in practice, if it's well written, there is no practical difference.
That's a
Right,
good point.
especially because it almost always includes the most important piece of information, which is the email address of the author, the current email address of the author. They always change. But then somebody who wants to use it, if they don't understand the piece of paper, they don't understand, they can call up somebody, and often it turns out like, no, don't use this, make up your own.
Jim?
So I just sent this mail to the mailing list earlier today. which is if we're going to do a CDDL2, I'd rather hold off on this registry until we say we've got a lot of these things that we know about and we don't want to standardize them, or we're not planning to publish another version of the language.
Paul Hoffman, that's not the way I read your message, so thank you for clarifying. I don't agree. Well, I mean, we're trying to predict the future, so that's bad. But from my experience with IPsec, Ike v2, I think it is fine to create a registry and then let the working group, or if the working group has already dissolved, the remnants in the IETF decide at what point a V2 could be useful, and it collects all of the things that are in the registry, and it either redefines them or just points to it and says, my God, look at this registry, without even knowing how much will be in it at the time the person reads it. I think us trying to predict when or why we would do a CDDL2 is really hard. So let's not make that a gating factor.
Well, there are some things in the spec you cannot fix with a control operator, and one is the reach of cuts. And I think that is a pretty strong incentive to actually go ahead doing a CDDL2. And I also agree that bundling up things, I have a slide, the end of my slide said about bundling up things. Bundling up things in RFC at some point in time after 5 years or so is always a good idea. So that's another reason to do a CDDL 2.0.
But either way, what does that say toward having a registry?
Well, the point of having a registry is not internally facing, it's externally facing.
Right.
So it's telling people you can use CDDL even though we don't have your favorite control operators yet.
Right.
And you don't have to wait 5 years for the IETF to standardize it. You can do it on your own. And that's really the important part of the message in my point of view. And that's also a reason why I like the term specification required, because it packages in very few words that they do have to do some work there. So we want them to write it up. So that would be, since both essentially mean the same thing, expert review and specification required, that's for me a reason to go for specification required, because it sends a very clear signal. You have to write it up.
And as Paul pointed out, in any case, it's picking it up pretty well. As Paul pointed out, in any case, when you do go to write version 2, you have a collection of extensions that you can bundle in or not as you want.
Before you start, there's one minor thing that maybe is interesting to think about. If we do these bundling RFCs, of course, we run into copyright issues with the original specification. So I don't think that 8126 thinks about this problem or has anything that would help with this problem. So, I mean, we're not going to invent this for this spec, but in the long run, I think it would be nice to actually be able to do these bundling RFCs without having to go into protected copyright negotiations with the original spec authors.
Hi, this is Hank. Half of the things I wanted to say are now gone. Also, just highlighting, we have a clear vision of what is to be included in 2.0, and it is. I think sometimes it will be of the same size to that already. So there are some interesting problems we want to solve. And also regarding specification required, I think that's. I don't really understand. There's an alternative of having the expert review, and there's some code of conduct that is basically requiring you as a good etiquette to have that specification.
I'll explain it. So expert review says you have a person or a group of people assigned to review the requests, and they are given some sort of guidance in the document about what they should consider. But nothing other than a request for registration is required.
Okay.
Specification required adds to that the requirement that you have a publicly available stable specification.
Okay.
that the reviewer and other people can see.
But you can have, of course, and this is basically obvious now, but let me just make sure, you can have a public available specification, probably also from other SDOs, and that's not a disabler for having that request to get a control registered, of course. So
Correct.
expert has just to like that specification and think it's sane.
Specification required is expert
Yes.
review
Yeah, I get it.
plus a public specification.
Yeah, but it can also be a plus specification if it's not required. So it's not.
Oh, yeah, you can always have, we don't say you
Only
can't.
the expert has to like it. So
Yes.
that is.
The
Okay.
expert has to
Yeah.
think it's sufficiently detailed to allow you to develop an interoperable
I think
implementation.
that's enough incentive to do it without specification required.
This is Chris from Comcast. It's worth noting that people are going to extend it. If we don't give them a registry to share and put their extensions in there, then what we have is a mess, not, So what we're really talking about is how do we organize the boxes? And I hear a lot of support for everybody wants people to write specifications. But it's worth noting that if we don't give them an easy way to contribute and share and whatnot, they're just going to extend it anyways, and who knows what the result will be.
So I heard a couple of people against having this registry. Do you want to take in more, or you think you have said everything? A couple of people against and a couple of people for. And slight preference for having a registry.
Should I record that? Or?
Yeah, do you want to harm or show hands,
Well, let's just say, anyone who does not want to have a registry, please say something.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Ryan Carpenter? Carsten, how much delay do you think this will inject into getting the document to last call?
20 minutes?
Okay, then.
Because we decide this here and now. If it turns into a roadblock, we drop it like that.
Yeah. Then I know how to.
All agree about
Thanks. I know how to hum.
Yes.
Can I alter the question slightly? Who will be very upset if the registry is added?
That's basically what I'm saying.
I'm making it stronger as opposed to,
Does anyone not want a registry?
No. Who would be upset?
We have
Would be
Sean does not
upset if
want a
it's
registry.
there.
Would you die on that hill?
I wouldn't die on the hill.
Sean would not die on the hill.
I think innovation.
Yeah, please, if you have more than a few words to.
Yes, please stay alive.
Sean Leonard. So I wouldn't be very upset if a registry were added. I just think that it imposes more trouble than it's worth at this stage of CDDL. In particular, I think that control operators, if they are successful and people use them, could be used for a lot of other things. And the registry will impose a very narrow view of what control operators can be, namely one operator applies to one variable or one element, right, of the protocol
That's
only,
what
and
the
not all these
language
other
does.
things.
That's not what the registry does. The
Yeah,
language
but-
defines what a control operator is.
I still don't think it helps, I guess, right now. Unless the registry is first come, first serve. If the registry is first come, first serve, then okay, because then it's just a repository of what everybody else is doing. But I don't
So-
think anybody wants first come, first serve.
You don't think it's useful to have somebody do a sanity check on the requests?
I think that will inhibit innovation in people doing stuff, or they'll just do stuff anyway and not bother registering it.
We will do that anyway. So.
That's going to happen regardless.
So maybe my experience working with other SDOs is that they like to cite documents. They like to cite documents from the IETF because they think these are high quality documents and that improves their standing. And once they cite them, they also don't want to be caught not properly using them. I'm accepting ITU, ETSI, and 1M2M here because they just started squatting on CoAP code points. But all the other SDOs I'm working with generally try to actually keep the spirit of the documents they are citing. So if we say we expect people to supply specifications for that, that has an effect. It really changes what's going on in that other SDO, and I would like to see this effect.
Yeah, just along the same lines, Dave Waltermeyer, I think having a registry, it doesn't prevent folks from experimenting and playing around with the language, but when there are two parties that want to do the same thing, it gives them a way to agree on that, and that adds value.
Alex Simeonikov, the other comment I would like to make is that by picking one or more experts, you can somewhat control the outcome of this. I mean, that might be a bit obvious, but you can specify partially in the document what kind of restrictions or what kind of encouragement you will make to the experts, but you can also select experts with potentially divergent views to help, allow for wider types of control operators or whatever.
The you in your sentence was I, right? You can select that expert. We cannot. The working group cannot.
Like you, a person. One can.
Well, you can always, chairs or the working group can always propose more than one. That's what I'm saying, for example.
So his comment was spot on. Is Chris from Comcast again? When people want to work together, they need some way to have. I mean, that's the point of the specifications, and the point of the registries is so that people aren't continuously reinventing it. All of the arguments for designated expert that I've heard, and I say all, okay, most of the arguments for designated expert basically boil down to, well, designated experts will encourage good specs. So I'm hearing a lot of support for specifications, and I think I would support specifications. And if there are people who think that we should do designated experts specifically so that we can have control operators that don't have specs, I'd be really interested in hearing that argument.
Well, Paul's argument, if I may save him the trouble of jumping up, is that there may be registration requests that really don't need much of a specification, and simplifying that would be helpful. And the designated expert can always say, sorry, your request is complicated enough that I'd like you to write up a specification.
Right, and to that I would respond that if it really is that simple, then the spec should be pretty easy.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. There's a clear advantage of specification required in that the registration template includes the reference, and therefore when you go to the registry, anyone can find it. That's why specification required is the right thing.
Thank you.
Does anyone other than Paul feel that we should use expert review instead of specification required? Paul is saying he's okay with either. Jim?
I don't actually see a whole lot of point of specification review. I mean, one of the reasons not to have a specification is I've got something that is so esoteric to my spec, which is a company spec and not public, that I want to write a control operator. Now, does that make any sense for me to register it? If it's really just this one spec that I'm writing a control operator for, of course, I can also say, why am I bothering to write a control operator? But that's a different question.
I think that's a good point actually for the text in the IANA considerations section. So some organization might want to write a control operator that uses some information that is actually confidential. And well, the specification could be pretty short and say this uses confidential specification so and so, and then we're done with it. And the text could be explicit that this is something that we do want to allow in cases that where it makes sense.
Yeah, Brian Carpenter, this could become controversial.
Okay, let's not do it.
The IETF has a tendency not to like secret protocols declared interoperable. So, I would try to keep that out of your text. that meme is a dangerous meme.
Yeah, I'll support that. I think what generally happens in those cases is that they just use the name without registering it, and they don't worry about it too much.
Right, and that was what I was going to suggest, that there's no secret INA police that are going to come and kick your company down because you violated the spec and didn't tell anyone.
Yeah. Alexa, you have something to say?
Yeah, I would advise against it, but I suppose, if you have expert, at least expert has to have access to the spec to judge whether it's having, allowing for secret specification, non-references to secret specifications. But again, I'm just comparing this with media types. With media types, specification is encouraged, is not required, and sometimes people will say an expert is sort of almost bound by NDA, but expert has to be able to look at the specification to decide whether it's a good thing or not. So,
yeah.
Yeah, the difference is that you normally don't write tools that need to understand all the media types that are out there.
Oh, yes, you do.
Yeah.
And in many different. Yeah, let's not.
Yeah, this is the.
Okay, where I see we are right now is put the registry into this spec. It will take 20 minutes, which means it'll take an hour and a half, but that's okay.
The factor of pi is already in there.
The factor of pi is already in there. And make the registration policy specification required. Give advice to the designated expert leaning toward leniency in accepting these, and that's it, right? Does anyone object to that result? Can anyone not live with that result? Okay, I see people reading their email. Good. We'll put that in the minutes. Whoever's taking minutes over there. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so if you thought the previous item was boring, I have another one for you. It's, of course, a control operator, and there are a number of control operators that were added pretty late in the process because when doing real-world specifications, we found we had a problem. We couldn't say that something needed to be larger than 3, but open on the other end. So we added less than, greater equal, greater than, less than equal. And of course, usually you add an equal and a not equal as well. The more likely uses are less than and greater than, and these are defined for numeric types. I'm not aware of another type in CDDL that really could make useful sense of this. I mean, we could define a string comparison for this, but really nobody needs that. So we also have regular expressions for most of the cases where that would be useful. So I think it's pretty clear that the inequalities, less than, greater, equal, and so on, that these stay confined to numeric types. Now, I looked at my tool recently, and one of the problems of writing a tool in a high-level language is that you sometimes program things that you haven't thought about. And it turned out that equal and not equal actually do allow other data types. Then we looked out there and found, oops, people are using them with strings. In particular, the not equal one. The equal one doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the not equal one is actually a useful application. There are actually two variants that you might want to use. One is the numeric equality, where you have a constant somewhere that happens to be a floating point constant, and you still want to constrain some integer values to not take on that particular floating point constant. So 1 to 5 and not equal 3.0 would be 1, 2, 4, 5, because not equal is defined on a numeric basis. Or you could say something like any number that is equal to 3, which is a short way of saying 3 or 3.0. So you don't have to define a constant twice. So I think these are reasonable applications. Both I haven't seen in the wild, but I can imagine seeing them.
Oh, clarifying what you're proposing, you're saying that if you use equal or not equal on things that look like numbers, they compare as numbers, not as strings.
Well, look like is very, very tightly defined in the document, but yes.
Yeah.
So there are only integers and floating point values that can do that. So that's one potential meaning, and let me quickly say the other one. The other one would be structural equivalence. And this would just use the same semantics we use in other places where we match things. So that would allow things like any label except for foo. Jim.
Jim Schott. I'm having a bit of a problem with one because of the slide you had earlier, where you distinguished integer types from floating point types as different types. So now you are basically doing equality between different types.
Yes.
I have a bit of a problem with that.
Well, the point
I don't
is
have a problem with any of the rest of what you said.
The base language makes a strict distinction. And this control operator is expressly defined not to make it. So it's exactly the escape hatch you can use when you are unhappy with that capability of the base language. It's meant to be the other way.
Hi, this
Jim,
is
just a second. Jim, is your issue that you're confused, or is your issue that you understand it but don't like it?
My issue is I understand it and I don't like it.
Okay. That's what I thought. Just checking. Hank?
and if you wanted to be more restricted, then just use something more specific than numbers. I mean, you could write float there. And it would work. And it would just...
Well, there is very little intuition in saying that int.eq3, because you could write 3 in the first place.
Yeah, but again, it would address your concern. But maybe I don't understand why Jim does not like it. I thought that the genericness of the expression here, and this specific example, was what you're not like.
Why Jim doesn't like it is actually very simple. He likes type. He likes languages which are strict on type.
Yeah.
Well, this is strict on types, just has a different type system than the one you're used to.
If I define number as being a type which is the range 1.5, and I say number dot equal 3.0, then I'm doing a type conversion. No, I'm not.
Go to the mic.
Yeah, I think at some level, Jim, we're saying that there are three types here. There are integers, there are floating points, and there are numbers. And numbers are both of the others.
Yep. So if you're wanting a way to say, I am in a range of numbers between 1 and 5, you need a way to say that.
Yes.
That doesn't look like integers. But what you said was, if I say 1.5, I would certainly interpret that as integers between inclusive in the range. So are you asking for a way to say a range of numbers?
If I define that as number, can I say number dot EQ 3.0?
Yes. Yes. Oh, so you're okay. Yeah. I want to see text.
Yeah, I agree. It's, I mean, this is discussing something for a napkin, but I just wanted to open up the choices so we can, at the end, agree on something. Imagine that this says something like, we have a solution where NE and EQ are the numeric operators. And then, of course, the question is, do we actually need this on the structural side, on the general structural side as well? And we also have .default, which is essentially .NE, but really is used for a lot of things that are not numbers. So that's really calling out that we need to do something here.
What is the use case where you have something that's a number and you don't know whether it was a floating point or integer?
Don't you always know? The question is, when a specification has a composite construct for a number that does something. We protocol types are actually not used to that. We don't deal in numbers, we deal in integers, but Yang doesn't even have floating point. Imagine that. It's a little bit unusual for us. But if you have a composite construct that already is a useful abstraction in the rest of your specification, and then you want to grab into this construct and remove one numeric value, which may have two representations, 3 and 3.0.
Okay.
That would be the use case.
Okay. And I see, and Mike Koster is nodding.
So how do we, if we actually think we need both branches of this, how do we name these branches? Now, first of all, the observation is .NE is actually in use today. So people are using it in specifications that I have seen. .EQ is very rarely used. I mean, almost always when you want something to be equal to something, you just write the second something. So that I had to think a little before I came up with the example there. So the actual case where we have to worry about backward compatibility is .NE. But of course, we want these to be symmetric, or we will violate the principle of least surprise. What I actually have seen in specifications, excuse the thing that looks like a period, that's just a bullet. Label .NE foo. That's a very common construct. And we probably want to allow something like that, but we may have to force specification writers to use a different control operator here. So that we try to avoid that, but maybe here it is unavoidable. So if we want to keep NE for the numeric case, we would come up with a new one for the structural case. And maybe another reason for that is we already have .AND, which is the .EQ for the structural case. It's a slightly more general .EQ, but we probably wanted to have the .NE variant, the structural one, with the same generality. So we would define something like a but not. We can find a better term, but so that would probably be the most symmetric way to solve this problem. So is there anybody in this room who cares about the outcome of this? Otherwise, I could just write something in the next version, and we'll see in the second work group last call whether that was okay or not.
Okay, and
hello?
Jeff is on the, yeah, go ahead.
Your suggestion to reserve NE and EQ for numeric things makes sense to me. I don't have a lot of experience using them, so I don't know if it'll work in the real world, but this makes sense, and then adding a new one maybe later for type subtraction. That also seems safer to do in CDDL1, and we could extend it in CDDL2.
Can you say once more what this is? You were hard to hear.
Restricting any and EQ to numeric types.
And possibly extending in 2.0, CDDL 2.0 for the rest, I think.
Yeah. Restricting it in CDDL1 seems like a safe option, and then we can extend it later if we need to.
I wouldn't like to keep the people who are using this right now in the dark. So I would prefer to have a control operator that does this right in 1.0. Excuse me, I pointed at label.ne foo.
Yeah, that seems okay to me also to do a subtraction operator.
Yeah, but it would not be .ne, it would be a new operator name that we come up with just for that, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think set difference is sufficiently well understood that we do not have to write something very complicated about that.
Okay, Sean Leonard. So I pretty much agree with Jeffrey about the points that he made. I think I just want to point out maybe a broader concern I have, which is that, as we said, .eq is there mostly for symmetry, but the actual utility of it is very dubious in specification writing at this point. And I think that raises the question of, maybe we're trying to define too much or trying to do too much with control operators in general when they just don't have a utility. I don't want to pick on .ne because it does seem people are actually using it quite a bit, but there are a number of, at least, for .eq, I wonder why do we even put it in there if we're not sure, when it seems like nobody's actually using it. And similar arguments could be made with a couple of the other control operators.
Do you want me to answer that question?
Well, I see it's there for symmetry, but
there is no language on Earth that has the 5 other operators and not the 6. That just doesn't exist. And so this would be a very big violation of principle of least surprise.
Okay.
And more generally, when designing protocols, I always have been bit when I started to make policy level, judgment level decisions. Is this particularly useful or not? People will find uses that you have no idea that they existed.
Okay.
And as long as it says simple, and it does here in this case, I think having a symmetry is right.
Okay.
Symmetry is always a good argument.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Okay. Given that we have covered this, a recent item of discussion on the mailing list was something that I called representation variants, but I think that was a carelessly chosen term because it actually means 2 different things. So when you represent something, you take it down one level on the hierarchy of different modeling mechanisms that we have. So you represent an information model in a data model, you represent a data model in a serialization, and so on. So I think a better term would be serialization variants, because that's really the issue that we were having. And I think on the mailing list, we discussed about serialization variants in protocol definitions and in implementations, which are really two separate issues that just have to work together in a good way. So probably we need to be a little bit more specific about serialization variants. And we actually are in one place where we talk about consistent encoding, the part that used to be called, am I allowed to say this word? Canonicalization. Okay, and now I need mouthwash. The idea behind consistent encoding is you don't have serialization variants. So for every data model item, there's exactly one way to encode it. And this is what the term consistent encoding really tries to express. And it turns out in a language like CBOR, consistent encoding is expensive because we inherited maps from JSON. So we don't want to impose consistent encoding on everything, which otherwise would be exactly what I would normally do. In a protocol specification, I like consistent encoding. I don't like several variants, all of which I have to interoperability test at the end. Now, there are other places where there are serialization variants, and the current document doesn't quite go so far and say there is a preferred encoding for this case. But it kind of is written with the subtext that there is. And maybe we should make this a little bit more explicit and say there's just a way you're supposed to encode things. And yes, if you have an implementation constraint that doesn't allow you to do that, then we will have to deal with that. So it's a little piece of posterior principle here. Be liberal in what you accept, be conservative in what you send, and the preferred encoding will essentially be the conservative part. And but we would not stop saying be liberal in what you accept. So we would continue to accept the other variants, which is, for instance, different from UTF-8. In UTF-8, the decision was made to not accept them because people found out only after years of using UTF-8 that they could be used for interesting attacks. But this is something that has been around with the variants nicely exposed. So somebody who builds a security protocol based on this should know that there are serialization variants. Let's get a little bit up the stack again and see what are the actual serialization choices that are relevant in practice. And not talking about implementations, talking about specifications. So a specification, for instance, might say, there are no floating point numbers in this specification. And normally you don't have to write that because your data model specification already contains no floating point numbers. So you actually don't have to make this serialization choice. And once you say there are no floating point number serializations, you cannot have a data model that allows that because you wouldn't know how to serialize them. So that's a choice that can be handled entirely on the data model level. So we actually can express this in CDDL, not explicitly, but by just not using floating point. Now, one other thing that actually makes a lot of sense in some embedded environments is to say we disallow 64-bit floating point numbers because we only have software floating point, and the software floating point library we use only supports 32-bit. So in this case, you actually make a serialization choice. If your data model only uses numbers that can be represented as 32-bit integers, and you use preferred encoding, then again, you can express this at the data model level. So again, you don't need something in CDL to express the serialization choice, because CDL is about the data model anyway. You can do this by just saying which numbers you support. Third example, disallowing 64-bit integers, string length, item counts, and tags. That's also a pretty obvious thing you might want to do in an embedded system. So that's also something that you would get. Probably you want to write something in your specification here because there is, it would be very tedious to say for every byte string in your CDD8 specification, this cannot be longer than 2 to the power 32 bytes. So it's better to just handle this outside of CDD in a separate sentence. And now I seem to have piqued the interest of people.
Mike Jones, Microsoft. The FIDO2 specification, which uses CBOR for its data representation, addresses a number of cases where data, in particular for extensions, has to be transformed from JSON to CBOR, and in the other direction as well, from CBOR to JSON, because JSON represents all numbers as 64-bit floats. that specification made...
JavaScript does that, JSON.
Yes, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
JavaScript represents all numbers as 64-bit floats. That specification made the choice that when converting JavaScript values to CBOR, we would always use the 64-bit floats. So any thing that disallows the use of the 64-bit floats, at least in certain contexts, seems to at least make life with JavaScript compatibility more difficult than it needs to be.
Dave Woltmeyer, I guess speaking as suit chair. We've been working with CBOR, and we're running into problems around there not being enough constrained implementations of CBOR, which has really gotten me thinking about the tooling problem in general in this space. I guess taking my chair hat off, I think we want to make decisions around serialization that lead to more tooling. And it seems like the more fragmentation that we get in serialization, the more fragmentation that we're going to get around tooling. And that just seems like a really bad idea. We should probably focus our efforts on allowing choices that can be included in CDDL directly, like disallowing floating point numbers and avoiding as much as we can the kinds of choices that would be bound to the specific serialization format. Just because, again, that's just going to complicate tooling. It's going to mean you're going to have to do a lot of special case handling, and that just seems like a really bad idea from a tooling and interoperability perspective.
Hi, this is Henk, and this is especially only about serialization, not encoding translations.
What?
Yeah, I'm talking about only CBOR, not JSON CBOR comparisons.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm calling this encoding, serialization is in CBOR specific in this
Okay.
case. So talking about CBOR, I think there's a benefit to disallowing it in a document, in a data definition document, because in general, first of all, it would be noisy to do all the other controls that would disallow each for each value. And again, if you have extension points, you can still mess it up with your extension. So this would inherit into extensions. And that's important for the constraint device not to be, backstabbed by a stupid extension. And that's important, I think.
Okay, so careful what you wish for. Adding a serialization control language to CDDL probably adds some time.
Okay. 2.0 is okay. CDDL is the point.
Okay.
So Lawrence Lundblade, on the the highly constrained environments and the tooling, there's some comments there. I would imagine like 95% of all implementations are going to be fine with 64-bit ints and floating point, and they can use the preferred serialization variant, if I'm using the right term there. That seems reasonable to me, and that and we can have a lot of good tooling around that, and that's fine. But I think we still have to have the option for. I really would like to see us be able to, have good interoperable protocols that run on like 8-bit CPUs that just have no floating point and, less than a kilobyte of onboard RAM or something like that. So those to me seem like special case tooling. And it's only a small market, it's only a small part, but and maybe we can construct the document so it's really clear, like, okay, you're in the mainstream part where we got nice, good tooling, and then there's some cases where you really do need to be use special tools. Lawrence Lundblade.
Okay, so what I was trying to say is we kind of have everything 95% of the applications need. I agree with, what was it, Hank? Somebody said you can still mess up in some control operators or so. That's maybe a problem. But for 95% of all situations, we have what we need. If we make it explicit that a specification of a format might contain additional English language that constrains the serialization. I still think that having a preferred encoding is a good way to reduce the number of variants that actually sprout from that. So I know that there are some high-speed applications, for instance, that always want to send all floating point numbers as 64 bits. So that's a very specific serialization constraint that's not compatible with another serialization constraint which says don't use 64 bits. So we are not going to solve that problem there. These implementations won't interoperate ever. But we can make it easy for the default choice, for the default case, to actually interoperate. And that's why I think we should stick with what we have at the CDDL level for now, maybe add something like a serialization control language later. And on the CBOR side, put in something that's called preferred encoding. Almost all of that is in canonical encoding or strict encoding at the moment. So preferred encoding probably would be a very short section by just saying, do everything you would do for consistent encoding, except that for maps you don't have to. And then we would be done with it. Now, I wasn't quite done with this slide here. There's one more serialization choice that the first draft of CBOR didn't have, but people said they need it, and I agree that it's useful. Indefinite lengths. And there are some very constrained implementations that don't do indefinite lengths. So that's another serialization constraint that you would write in English right now. And maybe we would later be able to express in a serialization control language. So what I actually see more often is that people do support indefinite lengths for arrays and maps, but not for strings, because that's a little bit more work to do. Okay. So what I essentially wanted to say is serialization variants are invisible at the CDDL level. Originally, we had thought CDDL would have all its fingers in the serialization level, but it turned out people weren't using that. So we kind of cut back on that and said, okay, let's use CDDL for the data model level. And if we want to do something at the serialization level, we do that separately. So there are no serialization hints in CDDL left at this point in time. Okay, if we are done with this, then I would like to come back to Jim's comments, because we didn't handle them. So I think some of the editorial stuff we already have done and just didn't take off. One editorial comment was there could be a much better section numbering. Unfortunately, there are 30 internet drafts out there that reference specific sections of this draft. It would be really a burden on them to change that. And people not only don't like changing that, they get it wrong all the time. So changing section numbers is something I normally don't do lightly for something that already has been referenced in a lot of places. So I think that might be a good thing for CDDL 2.0, but not at the current point.
For issue 9, changing section numbers, I'd be surprised if a whole lot of people were referencing that, because what I said was I'd like Appendix E, Section 1 to be basically moved up a level. Oh. And that's the only one that I listed there.
Oh, okay. I read a more general comment out of it, but if it's just about E1, you mean moved up a level like being
Make it
appendix
its
F?
own appendix.
Make it its own appendix. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we actually have a number of appendix numbers that aren't used because we wanted to keep appendices at the place where they were. So there will be a little bit of reshuffling, but I think we can do that. Thank you. Very good. There were several pretty good comments about the ability to write nonsensical CDDL. And probably it would be good to have tools that find these things. The tool that I wrote as a proof of concept doesn't do any of this. So it doesn't help you, it produces no warnings and so on. For me, this is mostly a tool quality issues. We should write better tools. And I finally need to find a student who writes a better tool than mine. There may be at some point a language issue coming from that, because if tools start to be helpful, you need a way to silence warnings. So that may come back to us, but probably again not at CDA 1.0. Helpful is about the word that Douglas Adams has under the term Belgium. Everywhere outside Earth, Belgium is the worst insult you can utter. And so helpful is something that people on the street would have positive connotations. But when an implementation or protocol starts to become helpful, you have to run because it's going to hurt you. And yeah, so that's why you have to have ways of getting rid of that help and silencing these warnings. So at some point we will need some pragma syntax or all this stuff. Okay, so I think that's not actionable at this point in time, or we shouldn't action it at this point in time. But of course we should keep in mind that there is some work to be done. Yeah, Jim saw that the unwrap grammar is broken. And not only is the unwrap grammar broken, but also the precedence table is broken for unary operators, so that has to be fixed. Yes, sorry for missing that. And also there was an omission in the section about generics. Generics apply to groups as well as types, and that's actually very, very useful. Okay, so that's Jim's comments. If there's anything else I still need to do, please speak up at some point when there is an editor's draft. Yeah, so at some point I will alert you and say, I think I have covered all your comments, and then you can tell me that I didn't. Good. So that ends the open issues. There are a number of closed issues that I just want to recap so they don't necessarily come up in the working group, in the second working group last call again. We know that there is no good answer to the regex issue. The XSD regex that we currently are using are definitely weird, but they seem to work with the specifications that I have seen out there in the wild. So the change from PCIe to W3C XSD probably has the lowest amount of damage at this point in time to people out there. And we can quickly solve it later on by just registering specification. A specification requirement document is not going through downref checks, so it will be easy to define another operator that does it for PCIe. So that's simple. We also decided to be very conservative with adding this cut stuff. And one comment was that we are creating security problems for protocols that use this style of distinguishing different types of data objects. So cuts don't help you here. Cuts help you when you have a distinguished key, but not when you have a distinguished value. And we sure will fix this in the next version of CDL. And that's one of the reasons why Hank said we want to have 2.0, but we wanted to minimize the impact of cuts at this point in time. There's also a general cognitive dissonance, at least if you know a little bit of computer languages. We have this weird combination of a grammar that is fundamentally context insensitive. Okay, control operators change this a little bit, but fundamentally this is your Chomsky type 2 engine that you're used to. But then the grammar creates something that then has to go through the funnel of the serialization mechanism that we are using. And maps are definitely extremely context sensitive because you cannot have a duplicate key. You have to look at your context to find out whether you can produce something or not. Unfortunately, there is no way around that. And I'm surprised by how well this works by having a context insensitive foundation and then funneling the results through the context sensitive maps. And now we are introducing cuts, which put in a sequence dependence that funnels through the map specifications. It doesn't make the sequence in the maps relevant, but it makes the sequence in the specification relevant. So that is something that is a little bit against the principle of least surprise. Normally, when you specify a map, you would expect that all the lines in the map specification can be exchanged and there are no semantic changes, but that doesn't allow you to have wildcards. And since wildcards are pretty important for extensibility, it does make sense to use the fact that the grammar already is sequence dependent by definition, and use that to manage these wildcards. So it's a bit weird, and it's a little bit like steak with chocolate sauce or something, but I think we can get used to the taste, and it seems to work. But I can say you that it does cause a little bit of concern when you think about it for the first time, because it's concepts that normally don't mix.
So what Carsten just went over is not new information. He's summarizing where we were in discussions. If, as Francesca posted in the Jabber room, if anyone can't live with where we are, please speak up. Now we're on the list. Nothing now, so.
So, ship it. So my plan is to have dash 04 out there on Monday the 30th. So we still have a little bit time to hash out any open details on the mailing list the next week. And if we start the second working group last call then I'm sorry for the French people because they won't see it. Yeah, they have one day. They can look at it on the 31st. And then of course the next question is if the working group last call finishes August 15th, is that anything the ISG or Alexei first can handle, or is it really not necessary to speed up as much?
Sorry,
if this document lands on your desk on August 15th, what will happen next?
Well, next Alexei will review it.
Yes,
then
I know, but
maybe it'll go back and forth, and then it goes to last call, which is 2 weeks, and then it goes to the IESG telechat.
Yeah, but last time I made this kind of calculation, and the ID went on vacation.
Alexei, are you planning to disappear for a while? He shakes his head. He shakes his head in a non-committal way. He bobs his head, I should say. Because I'm figuring, say, 6 to 8 weeks for it to go through IESG.
Oh, yes,
approval.
certainly. I'm just wondering.
I'm planning to take a week off between 18th and 25th
Okay.
of August. So
I think
don't
that's
think
not
it's,
going to be a big deal. So,
Yeah, okay.
so yeah, I would say if we actually do get this to Alexei by the end of August, then we would say by the end of October, we would have it through IESG evaluation.
I think the important step is to have it approved. I know that there is a cluster bomb hitting the RFC editor in the next couple of weeks. So that might be a bit unresponsive at the end of the year. So we might have an RFC next year. But
we like to talk about Christmas gifts, so
Yes.
we'll hope for that.
Okay. Good.
just recalling some past experience, don't ask urgent publication of a document the first week
we have no intention of doing
of December, because it's not going to be published by January 1st.
No.
Just there is typically no way.
We have no
only
intention.
wanted January 5th.
We have no
Last
intention
time
of
that happened.
requesting expedition on this.
Sixth. Okay, I think that finishes the CDDL part. I have a couple of slides, maybe just to pick your interest a little bit on what may be next. And there are two areas in which we could work on CDDL if the ISG lets us. And one is just making the language better, solving the same problem. And the other would be adding scope to it and allow it to solve more problems. So in the first group, we have things like specifications in the large. So people are actually starting to compose pretty complicated stuff out of CDDL. So you have the specification of COSI here, and then you have a specification that uses COSI. How do you use something that already provides some structure, but you mix in your own structure? I think we have to examine this a little bit. So when I looked at the suit spec, I found the first place in the IETF where it would be good to have this composition. I think it can be handled with 1.0, but we may find things we want to fix. But there are also things like module systems, naming. If you merge two specifications together, somebody might have used the rule name foo in both places, and then you have a problem at the moment. And the other thing is controls, adding controls. I'm pretty sure we will have quite a few controls. Yeah, I think we understand how to do this now. The other group of work might be case insensitive, whatever I meant here. I think I was trying to say context insensitive. The other thing is going beyond structure interoperability into the lands of semantic interoperability. And yeah, so we could look at semantic augmentation. So most schema languages, CDDL is not a schema language, most schema languages have a way to actually add semantics to something. So you can say this is not only a number, but this is in Kelvin or in microkelvin or whatever. And this is the calibration data for this information can be found there. And there are lots of semantics that could be added here. And once you are able to augment a specification by semantics, it's also much simpler or much more powerful to do code generation from it. So right now, I'm still discouraging people to do code generation from CDL, although there's one pretty interesting idea for the embedded space. So doing code generation from CDL right into a parser that has essentially code for every single element. That's pretty interesting. But the general idea, like people are doing their Java from WSDL or something like that, that doesn't work too well with CDL. Second thing, those co-occurrence constraints. and more general predicate-based extensions. So these usually mix nicely to grammar-based foundation. And we already have an example with schematron and RelaxNG where this has worked pretty well. So maybe we want to do something similar. But we don't have to redo schematron. So the actual solution could be relatively simple by defining a few selectors and ways to add some semantics to that.
Dave Waltermeyer. I mean, if we already have schematron, one way, and I see you have a bullet maybe against this, but one way of handling this is to do some binding of XPath to JSON or CBOR, and then using something like schematron would be sort of a natural outcome of doing that. That wouldn't require anything additional in CDDL.
So I wrote the word CBOR path there. And one difference between CBOR path and XPath might be that we don't run into the problem that XPath has, that you essentially cannot compile it, because it kind of has a very tight coupling between the characters that are in the XPath and the characters that are in the XML specification. So you can write pathological XPath statements that cannot be compiled. And maybe we can do something that's a little bit simpler, that maybe only has 80% of the functionality, but actually can be compiled.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe some constrained version of XPath that would use a subset of features or...
But don't say XPath outside this room, because it will scare people a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem.
And I would be interested in helping with this.
Great.
Yeah, this is Henk. From my experience, speaking from personal experience, there are flavors of the scope XPath is used in. So typically you never use everything XPath is capable of. And finding the right flavor that is basically a subset of XPath functional capabilities for a CBOR path, I think that could be an ongoing process. This is not a project. And maybe from lesson learned, we can make multiple path versions, some of them more applicable to embedded devices, and some of them maybe more, or at least to that are, well, really powerful. So because there can be a kind of, anti-constraint node environment behavior of that filter stuff and finding and pointing stuff. And so we really most certainly want to avoid that and want to give people good and explicit guidance what to use when and where, I think.
Dave Waltermeyer. So I already have a use case for something like this in the COSWID draft that's in SACM, having some pathing language. Before we try to create multiple pathing languages, we should maybe first attempt to try to create one.
Or have user stories.
So one interesting question about this. There is something like a JSON path and a JSON pointer. And they are different things. Because one really is meant to be used in a specification-like environment, and one is really pointing into an instance. So you actually can bind it more closely to what's in the instance right now. And maybe we actually want to do these two.
Yeah, I want to understand those use cases a little bit better. Maybe it would be useful to write some drafts talking about some of these, like you're suggesting.
Starting, I think Suit is doing it really well. Sorry, this is Henk again. Suit is doing it really well in the information model. They aggregate user stories, derive requirements from it, and then have a list of measures and things and attributes that address them. It's like awesome. Maybe we should do that.
I think the ISG doesn't like to hear that, but we have only one ISG member here, so.
You might have to dispatch
So I would advocate actually for something simpler, maybe just writing a paragraph or two describing, what we might accomplish with a path versus a pointer.
So
might be helpful.
Just look at RFC, is it 6901 or 6902, which is the JSON pointer. And obviously, a CBOR pointer has to be a bit more complicated because we just have more capabilities in the data model. But that may be all we need for those applications that need pointers.
Yeah. I mean, I know my use case is I need to be able to select a specific data point out of a CBOR, data set, and then do some kind of comparison against that. And so what I need in a pathing language is the ability to extract that information and support that kind of comparison.
So the different.
Let me, I hate to interrupt useful conversation, but this is not for this document, right?
No.
So we are running way late.
Okay, thank you.
Let's take that to another decision. Sorry about that. But we are supposed to have 30 minutes for this, and we only have 25 minutes total left. So can you do this in about 15? And so we can do some wrap-up stuff. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the other document that we want to do here is the RFC 7049-BIS. And just to remind people, so this was not meant to reinvent the language and re-examine all the decisions and do second system syndrome, but really mostly to document interoperability issues, make needed improvements in specification quality, and throw out things where it turns out maybe those weren't such a good idea. And so for instance, we already have discussed the text about canonicalization or consistent encoding, and we decided to farm that out. Of course, this is also a good time to do interoperability checks between implementations. And there is an RFC 6410. I only have this slide to have the number 6410 there, that defines how to do this. So this is the process document that guides us here. I still haven't heard about any patent claim that would apply to 7049, which is mostly because we are using technologies from the 70s. But actually, I found the first RFC that uses BNF is RFC 5. So if you ever need to explain why we are using BNF in the IETF, it's RFC 5. The number of implementations is still growing. Of course, some of these implementations are now completed projects, to be friendly, or abandoned projects. So we may want to clean this up at some point, but that's not something that this working group does. But there is a body of code out there that implements this. So even if you have to write your own code, there are enough places to look at where you can steal from. And there are even things in Haskell and Rust. And so this has been, there is no urgency perceived on 7049 BIS, but of course we want to get it done before this working group is closed by an impatient AD. And what happened here in this case particularly was that I got sick after the last IETF, and when I got sufficiently recovered, there were so many other things pulling on me that it didn't happen. So we're kind of pretty much where we were when we left London. So we already discussed maybe the most important CBOR issues around serialization invariants, consistent or preferred encoding. And there is some discussion on that still happening on the mailing list. I think we need to complete that discussion. There are some 8 GitHub issues at the moment. I think most of them are won't fixes, but we have to do the write-ups for those won't fixes. And there are a few things in the IETF 101 minutes that are still on the to-do list. So, for instance, one issue that was raised was that the regex tag We're not talking about the regexes in CGDL. We're talking about the ability in a CBOR instance to say that this character string is to be interpreted as a regex. This tag is not very specific. It actually says this is either in PCRE or in ECMA 262 in JavaScript syntax. So there is only a limited usefulness of the information this tag provides. So there was a proposal to add a tag specifically for the ECMAScript syntax, and actually maybe for the current one and not for the 1999 one. So yeah, we could do that, but this is not really an interoperability issue that needs to be fixed. We can just go ahead and define those tags if we need them in an application, but it's not something that actually requires handling it as an issue on this document. At least that's my point of view. We have a little bit of editorial work to do. We now have a defined data model, and we haven't really touched all the places in the document that would benefit from that. And we actually have taken in some new text recently that makes less use of it than it could. So I think pull request number 11 needs some tender level care. There's also a related discussion about the processing behavior on invalid input. So many other serialization formats have elaborate rules about handling invalid input. And of course, the textbook example here is HTML, where a browser derives some market benefit from being able to handle even the most broken HTML. And that's not something we want to prescribe in this specification. So on the other hand, we are also very careful in imposing validity checks on a decoder. So unless a decoder advertises that it implements strict mode, it doesn't really have to look too precisely into what it gets. So that gives you a little bit of ambiguity, and this actually gives you some interesting security implications. So if you actually need security in a certain place, because you are taking in unchecked stuff, then you probably want to go into strict mode. What CBOR, for instance, also doesn't require a decoder to do is to handle well-formed but invalid input. So if somebody sends you a tag 1 with a text string in it, that's well-formed, but we haven't defined what it means. And a decoder is not required to hand this to an application and say, oh, I got a tag 1 with a text string in it. So those are things that we are careful not to require a decoder to do. And maybe we have to document this a little bit more so people don't make too many suggestions on how we should handle this. Lawrence.
Yeah, I would think it would be all implementations should be safe against hostile input. You shouldn't have to go into strict mode just to be safe. Right. I mean, everybody needs to be safe all the time, always, right? So, yes. So strict mode should not be a requirement for security, right?
Well, it will be. There are different kinds of security. So in the C language, in the definition of the C language, they have a specific term called undefined behavior, which means if the coder writes this code, the compiler is free to make him a coffee or to explode or yes. Whatever. That, of course, is not the undefined behavior that we are talking about. So, of course, it has to say in its box. But it doesn't mean it has to produce a consistent result that is always the same thing. It just has to say it doesn't work.
So what's the relationship between strict mode and security?
If you have information that will be checked or used in multiple places, and you don't want to get into a time of check, time of use situation, then you need consistent handling even of errors. And the easiest way to get that is to use strict mode.
But not the only way.
No.
Okay. All right, that's, okay.
Okay, Jeffrey?
So my goal with 17 was not really to require all CBOR decoders to handle invalid input in the same way. It was to kind of classify invalid input so that we could say precisely in dependent specs how that dependent spec handles it. So one place that I did require everyone to reject input was what I called fatally ill-formed, which is things like additional information of 30, which there's just no way to recover. And if you think that we should allow implementations to recover from that, I don't think it's terrible to turn fatally ill-formed into just ill-formed. But I do think it's worth saying, like, this situation is ill-formed, or this situation is well-formed but invalid, so that specifications that use CBOR can in turn require things of their own implementations.
Are you aware of a place where you would say something is ill-formed but not fatally ill-formed?
Yeah, looking through the patch, where do I use this? So one place is in simple data. If the second byte is between 0 and 31, it's ill-formed but not fatal because you can easily just skip that additional byte. You can turn the simple item into undefined.
That was actually a place where we took the UTF-8 stand and said, don't do that. As a decoder, you're supposed to check.
What does don't do that mean?
Well, it's fatally ill-formed. You do not.
Oh, you would classify that as fatal.
Yeah, so if there is a CBOR 2.0, which I hope isn't, this could get a completely new meaning because it has been illegal.
Right. So if you want to constrain all implementations to simply bail out and not continue parsing in that case, that's also fine with me. Like, making new things fatally ill-formed is totally within the spirit of pull request 17. I just want kind of some definition of some classification of like the kinds of mistakes encoders could make and what decoders are allowed to do in response.
Right. So for me, the two classes of ill-formed and fatally ill-formed are identical. And if the text currently is insufficient in making that clear, we need to fix it. Do you have other examples beyond simple?
Let's see. So basically scanning my PR.
Maybe you can put this on the mailing list, but I think the objective should be to not have ill-formed stuff that is then still handed to the application. But the rules for things being ill-formed should be simple enough that it never happens that is working implementation generates that.
I think another example is a map with duplicate keys, which is more difficult to identify.
But that is not ill-formed. That is invalid.
Okay. Then again, like, review 17 and let's get it into a state where it clearly says what you intend.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Good. That was a really useful clarification of the input. And I'm at the end of the...
Excellent. So we have CDDL will, your next revision will come out by the 31st. Sorry, the 30th, because we need that one day for the French people. What do you think the schedule for an update to CBOR, to the CBOR spec will be?
So the milestone is still October.
Right. For
If
finishing
that's still-
it, but we're going to
yeah.
need
Yeah.
some revisions. So what is your plan?
Well, that of course depends a lot on what other interesting input comes in. But given what we know now, we have a little bit of surgery to do on the documents. But that should be doable within a month. So starting from the 31st, I think August 31st.
End of August for, okay. And I see a thumbs up from Paul. Good. Francesca and I had talked earlier about having conference calls, regular conference calls to keep the progress of the working group moving forward. What I'm inclined to do, we according to the rules, we need 2 weeks notice to schedule a conference call. And from there, we can schedule multiple ones. So we don't have to have 2 weeks each time. And what I thought we might do is give it 3 weeks from now, which gives us some time to get the Secretariat to make the first announcement. So sometime the week of the 6th of August to have the first conference call. And at that point, that should be about a week after the CDDL spec comes out and we're in the middle of working group last call. So we can just check on our progress and see that we've made that and we're going fine. My inclination is to go ahead and schedule conference calls every 2 weeks from that point. And if we decide that we don't need the conference call, then we can cancel it. But we have the regular schedule going at that point. Sorry?
All the way to Caroline?
For how long?
I would schedule them for for maybe 3 months, going through the end of October to August, September, October, going through the end of October, by which point we expect to have the CBOR spec finished. Yes.
For the notes, when were you going to have the first meeting again?
We will sort it out on the mailing list specifically, but it will be the week of August 6th.
Thanks.
That's what I'm planning. Jim.
Once you get to the middle of September, timing is going to be very important for me.
We understand not everybody's going to be able to make all of them, but if we try to set them up on a regular basis, we figure most people will make most of them. And the deal here is it's not going to be critical that everybody make every one. It's going to be checkpoints every couple of weeks on where we're going, what the issues are, and what the next deadline is. And I see Paul nodding and Karsten nodding. And okay, I will set that up with the Secretariat to make that announcement. We have a WebEx, working group WebEx that we will use for that.
So you just need my okay, right?
Yeah, no, actually we don't. We only need my okay on Francesca's, actually, or Francesca's, one or the other. We need your okay for a face-to-face meeting, but we're not going to do that. And so, do you have anything else, Francesca?
I think that was it.
Okay, we rushed Karsten for no reason. We are done 8 minutes early. So
You can finish,
go ahead and do
the
the tag
tags.
definition since we have the time.
So just to remind you why we have tag definitions in the document, CBOR was meant to be batteries included. And we deliberately decided to have a number of things that are not part of the basic machinery, but that we pushed into tags because we knew people were going to need it, but we didn't want to make the basic machinery more complicated than needed. So at one point in the development, I even had floating point as a tag, so I think I fixed that one. Yeah, there are various things, and these things are often a little bit in a prototype stage. So for instance, the my message that we originally defined was defined to be a text string, which is not very bright. And then somebody just registered another my message that is binary. But in general, I think the basic tags work out pretty well. We will have to fix one of the tag definitions in the CBOR document with respect to padding. We discussed this 2 IETFs ago, I think. I'm not sure that this text is actually in there. It's on my to-do list. But more importantly, it's very easy to register your own CBOR tags. There's even a space that is first come, first served. And we have about a little bit more than the same number of tags that are registered. For instance, COSI registers some CWT, UUIDs, sets, binary MIME, as I mentioned. Some Perl support their language text strings and some compression support. So maybe it's worth, when we are through this thick with the two main documents, to examine that landscape a little bit. And for Bangkok to have collected something like a My Favorite Tags document that contains all those tags that are not in 7049, but are generally considered useful. I mean, we already have RFCs. We are, of course, only going to point to them. But there are other specs that are generally useful, like the binary MIME tag. And of course, people can go to the IANA registry and then follow the link and so on, but then they will run into specifications that look very different, have very different levels of details, and just collecting this stuff in a slightly more consistent form might be a useful informational document. And of course, the target date is October, which we won't make, because that's the 5th anniversary of the CBOR RFC.
Dave Waltmeyer, why not use a wiki for this?
Because a wiki is this thing that never gets finalized. And the point here would be to say, these are some arrived tags that are stable and that you can use, and it just gives a different message. We can start with the wiki, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the right way to start this, indeed.
Paul Hoffman. So the question is, what is the value of this? And much of the value is discoverability by people who are coming into CBOR and think, oh, I need a new tag. Oh my God. And they haven't bothered to read the IANA considerations in the base spec, so they don't know about it. I'm not convinced we need it. I don't think it would hurt. I'm not aware of any other IETF working group that has had this kind of easy extensibility where this has been done. A data point is in DNS. We've had DNS extensions for well over 10 years, and there's half a dozen like real ones defined. And because there's no such document, and people, just due to the way that the IANA registry is, it's sort of hard to find the registry. People do reinvent the same extension over and over. And so this might help on it. I like even though I'm skeptical of the value of this, I also don't think it's going to take a heck of a lot of work for us. So it doesn't have to have a lot of value. And I really do believe that some people will be pleased to read it, as in, wow, this is sort of cool. That's a good thing to have people read when they're coming into CBOR.
No, and this is Barry supporting that last bit. POP, for instance, has a set of extensions that basically every POP server and client that's any good has to support. And having those collected in one place and saying, these are really useful extensions, please implement them, is useful.
Yeah, Lawrence, seems like protocol extensions for POP and DNS are things that are rarely done, require writing a lot of code, and where CBOR, we expect people to express all kinds of protocols in it. So this seems like it would be a much more common thing for people to use extensions here. So I would be in favor of this for that reason.
Yeah, so one way would be to do this as a working group document. Another way would be to do this as an individual submission, so it can be opinionated.
Yeah, personally, I'd prefer to see it be a working group document.
Okay.
I will have a hard time sponsoring.
Yeah, Alexei says he'd have a hard time AD sponsoring it, and
No,
I agree.
individual submission really around
If there's
the
an
IETF.
active working group that might be interested in it, and AD sponsoring it is kind of a weird thing. So
Dave Waltmeyer, back on the wiki topic though. I mean, how frequently do we see updating this information? Because do we need a formal process in order to update an informal set of information? If our goal is really just, availability of information, maybe we do it as a web page and then sprinkle references to that all over in various places where people commonly seek CBOR information. Is that enough?
Paul Hoffman, we don't know if it's enough. And so, and we do know people fall into RFC, come to RFCs. And so on that level, I think that would be good. It doesn't need to be updated. It doesn't need to be published, right? If the working group goes, no, like we don't want to publish this document, it's not a big loss, but it is a loss. So, and by the way, I'm very much against wikis. Whenever I come across a wiki page that hasn't been updated in 3 years, I feel like I don't know whether any of the information on this is still good and stuff like that. And RFC says a bunch of people looked at it.
I'll put another one out there, is that if we really think this is a relatively informal, relatively frequently changing thing, it can remain a working group draft that becomes listed on the working group page as an ongoing draft. And we never have to publish it.
I hope this working group closes down.
Well, yeah.
And then those are harder to find.
Then
Again, RFCs are the easiest thing to find. Old drafts are next
That's
easier.
true.
Yeah.
In the ROC working group, we actually had a document that was kind of a roadmap to frequent pitfalls and actual bugs and so on. And we kept that alive for 5 years.
For example.
At the end, we published it.
Yeah.
And again, if it's my favorite tags or a bunch of interesting tags, therefore we don't have to list everyone that's in the current IANA thing, I think it's fine. I mean, it's the IETF, but it could be lighthearted.
Yeah. And there are reportedly cookies outside as we speak. So our time is up.
Are you trying to prevent me from going?
Francesca has something to say.
Thank you for the meeting and see you in Bangkok.
Does the working group have a cookie policy?
Does the working group? We'll discuss that at the first conference call.
The only policy I've seen so far is the cookies are apparently more interesting than he. Whatever that policy is.
Great. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. So what would you think of Wednesday, the 8th? Probably around 11 a.m. Eastern time, which means 8 a.m. Pacific time, which means 6 p.m. your time.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up is I do not believe